In this episode,
I'm comfortable at 19 degrees. She's comfortable at 21. We tend to compromise and go with 21.
Some people, as soon as you walk out the door, they're at the controller changing things, you know.
It's not as cold down there as it is up here.
I wondered whether it was me going mad or whether it was an update somewhere.
There's units that won't run at 25 degrees.
It's almost like they know the answer, but they're asking you to see if you know the answer.
So a little bit of discomfort goes a long way.
welcome to another episode of Homeowners Q&A. I'm your host Mars, and today we're diving into one of the most misunderstood aspects of heat pump performance, weather and load compensation. Joining me are Michael Lacey from Vaillant, Sean Hogan from Avantis Eco, Liam Knowles from The Heating People, Ken Bone from Ultimate Renewable Supplies, and Dan Cadd from UK Alternative Energy. Welcome, guys. Thank you to Vaillant for sponsoring this episode. With over 150 years of experience, Vaillant is a trusted leader in heating and hot water solutions. Their commitment to innovation, sustainability, and energy efficiency has made them a household name across the UK and beyond. Vaillant's cutting-edge heat pumps and renewable energy systems are designed to deliver maximum comfort with minimal energy impact, helping homeowners reduce their carbon footprint while saving on energy bills. We're proud to partner with a brand that shares our passion for sustainable living and is dedicated to creating a greener future for all. For more information on Vaillant's products and solutions, visit vaillant.co.uk. Right, Ken, so this is a topic that we have covered on a lot of different episodes, kind of talking about weather compensation. But in case somebody's tuning in for the first time, can you just please explain to viewers what weather compensation is and how it works?
My version of how it works, weather compensation can be installed on a gas appliance or comes out the box with a heat pump. And what we're trying to do with weather compensation, or the settings or the curve number of a setup on an individual appliance, is we're trying to maintain your property comfort level when it's 10 degrees outside or -2 outside. So the heat pump and the weather compensation module knows what that outside temperature is, and it's trying to modulate either the gas boiler or the heat pump up to a level, and that level is determined under parameters that we put in from our heat loss design and everything else. The overall idea is I want my house at 21 degrees when it's 10 degrees outside or -2 outside, and it does it automatically in the background. That's the general idea of weather compensation.
So, Mike, how does load compensation differ to weather compensation?
So with weather compensation, you're looking at what's happening outdoors and the impacts of sort of outdoor temperature. Load compensation more focuses on what's happening indoors. So the kind of reference points are slightly different. With load compensation, what you're trying to do is hit that target temperature and maintain it in the most efficient way. So again, like what Ken's pointed out, this works for both heat pumps and boiler systems. All you're doing is kind of flattening out when you're comfortable, and maintaining or keeping the appliance going as long as possible at that kind of level. More traditionally with boiler systems, we saw a lot of them on-off systems, and what you would get there is that overshoot, undershoot. For me at home, when we had one of those systems, it would be the wife constantly turning something up and then back down and up and down, and you're not finding that kind of comfort level. Ultimately, I'm comfortable at 19 degrees. She's comfortable at 21. We tend to compromise and go with 21 because happy wife, happy life and all that. Everyone's kind of comfort level is different, but it's how we get there sustainably, efficiently, and make sure that the appliance, whatever it's connected to, is doing it in a sustainable kind of efficient way.
So on a weather compensation system, that probe sits outside. Obviously, for the load compensation, that sensor has to live inside. So is it just one sensor that goes inside a house, or can you have multiple sensors?
You can have multi-room sensors, depending on the kind of circuit setup and the system design, really. Traditionally in UK properties, we're used to having something in our living space which is monitoring kind of ambient air temperature, a room thermostat. That's the reference point. You could have an upstairs, downstairs, each with its own reference points and kind of tailoring it to the separate zones. And then, like you say, with weather compensation, you're looking at an outdoor sensor monitoring what's going on around the property, or it could be internet-based data. So there's two ways. It's either a physical sensor outside, or you pull weather data, open weather data. If you want a really accurate system, have the sensor placed outside in a suitable position as well.
So Dan, when you design systems, do you use both weather and load compensation? Is that kind of the optimal way of getting a system to be as efficient as possible?
Every manufacturer's controls are slightly different. I mean, like Ken said, they all come with weather compensation out the box, depending on the heat pump, really. We fit a lot of Panasonics, for instance. Sorry, Mike. But, we try and use the control that comes with the heat pump as the main control in the house. So we always try and get people to, try and convince people to do away with third-party controls and try and keep it, within that manufacturer's controls. I mean, the Panasonic one, for instance, uses weather comp, but also has a bit of load compensation in there as well, I believe. And I think Vaillant is actually the same, isn't it?
Yeah, there's different settings on the Vaillant control, Sense Comfort, which allows you to kind of tailor the system as to what role that kind of unit is playing. What you wouldn't want to do is permanently activate a load compensator and then stick it in a plant room. You're just going to kind of confuse the system, and then the control logic starts to fall over.
Yeah.
So you can deactivate it, you can activate it, you can activate it another level as well on expanded, but for heat pumps, we probably wouldn't advise that, only as sort of last resort.
So Sean, what Mike actually touched on there is quite important, because we had our central controller fitted inside our utility room cupboard, which constantly reads at like 28, 29 degrees. So that pretty much takes that whole load compensation feature out of play. How do you convince homeowners to potentially put a controller in their hallway or in a major living area?
Personally, I'm with Dan. Every house is dependent, but he uses Panasonic. I predominantly use Vaillant. When I'm designing and going through it with the customer, I don't put any sensor comfort or anything in any plant room. I'll say, listen, we need to find a space that's kind of in the middle of the house, isn't getting any solar gain. You're not in maybe a room where you're using a hairdryer a lot, or putting it in a kitchen where you're getting lots of extra heat that might not be accurate to the rest of the home. So we'll try and find a nice cool spot in the house. We'll always set it to inactive for the Vaillant and do full weather compensation. If it's a house and there's lots of solar gain and we're struggling where to put it, I'll put it on active. And on the Vaillants, that will then use the sensor comfort, and it will take the readings from the indoor temperature as well. Inactive on the Vaillant sensor comfort, it doesn't. It's just pure weather compensation. So I think there's a lot of it is educating the customer at the start before you go fitting anything. And we don't use third-party controls whatsoever. We sit down and train the customer how to use the sensor comfort.
How about you, Liam? What's your strategy?
Very much the same as Dan. We predominantly install Vaillant. We've not installed much of anything else really. But again, we tend to go for a full weather compensation setup where we can. I think around at about 2%, a little less than 2% of our systems, we've had to activate the room adapting function. So, made it low compensate or added the extra reference point in. But we've found for 98% of our clients that weather compensation's been perfectly comfortable for them.
We've teamed up with Egg, one of the UK's leading home energy providers, to give one lucky homeowner the chance to win a 6-panel solar installation worth £6,281. Perfect for a typical 3-bedroom house, this system can help you slash energy bills and cut your carbon footprint. The winner can also choose to upgrade by adding more panels or a battery, with flexible payment options available. This is your chance to future-proof your home, reduce grid reliance, and embrace cleaner, greener living, completely free thanks to Egg and Renewable Heating Hub. To enter, simply visit Renewable Heating Hub, link in the description. Terms and conditions apply. Don't miss out. Get your entry in now and start your solar journey sunny side up. Good luck. Ken, time and time again, we're beginning to see people on the forums complaining during the winter. Okay, we've gone into spring now, but during the course of the winter, they've said, the houses are very, very expensive to run. And when we ask them to go look at their settings, there's a set flow temperature that's set on that heat pump. Weather comp is not enabled. Why are installers still using set flow temperatures and not diverting to weather comp?
A lot of it's down to education. Maybe they don't even know about the philosophy of weather compensation as a whole. I know you and I have discussed various projects in the past. I've been to systems that are 3 or 4 years old, and weather compensation's not been activated. And as you say, that then negates high running costs, or that brings in high running costs, uncomfortable temperatures at certain times of the season and everything else. Yeah, it's quite difficult to just, apart from getting it explained to the end user, just to try and get the philosophy across to installers can be difficult. Also, some manufacturers you have to tinker with more than others to get the weather compensation, the comfort levels right.
We pick up a lot of servicing of air source heat pumps in and around Glasgow and Edinburgh, and we visited a housing estate last week. There was 25 air source heat pumps fitted in that one estate, some privately owned, some council properties, and it was the one company that fitted them all, and they went with just a kind of generic, basic 5 kilowatt Vaillant for every single property with a buffer. I went into 3 of the properties, and all of the heat curves, they were set to inactive, fair enough, but all the heat curves were set to 1.2. The flow temps were 55, and that is just what comes straight out the box from the factory. There's something amiss where they're just turning it on and walking away and leaving it. Either they don't know or they don't care, so we're not quite sure which way it is, but nobody's changing the settings. And then there's the aftercare. So with our customers, we'll set you up in a group chat on WhatsApp, and especially in the winter, it's harder to do it in the summer. We'll go, right, let's set this property well insulated. We'll start off at 0.6 on the heat curve, and then we'll get a cold day, let's drop it down to 0.55, see how it is for 24 hours until we find where the home's cold, and then we'll bump it back up another wee half a click.
That's an interesting point, Mike, in terms of the controllers that arrive out of the box. Are Vaillants predominantly set to set flow temperature? Is it on weather comp? How much actual configuration settings does the installer have to do in order to activate one or the other?
So with sensor comfort, so using eBus, so the protocol we use to communicate between devices. So when it does a digital handshake, so it looks at the topology of the system, it identifies whether or not there is actually a heat pump connected or a boiler connected. It will change what the factory setting on the curve is dependent on the appliance type. So out of the box, when you've connected it to a heat pump system, it will now revert to a 0.6 heating curve. With a boiler, it's 1.2. So by the sounds of it, those installs that weren't kind of commissioned, handed over to the property, if they're new builds, obviously someone's probably not moved in at that time, have just been left on basic, and we hadn't introduced that feature. But it's something we definitely saw in the field, so have tried to mitigate that through what we can do by identifying what components are attached.
So going back to Mike, so a lot of these systems are now online, so you should be grabbing data from installed properties, and obviously we talk about OEM. As you said there, Mike, it'd be good if manufacturers that are accumulating this data, that if they are connected to the internet, can start seeing the averages of, let's just call it weather compensation settings. When they now do come out the box, they're in that average range rather than the top of a weather compensation setting. And that would be a good start for the end user. And so if the installer or installers or companies are not doing their due diligence and aftercare, at least the heat pump or the system has got a relatively good start to run that system, rather than I'm just going to run flat out until I get a massive bill and then I start complaining.
In fairness to Vaillant, 0.6 is about 42.5 degrees, there or thereabouts, flow temperature. I did notice them going from 1.2 to 0.6 and wondered whether it was me going mad or whether it was an update somewhere. But I think it's already gone a long way to stopping people being able to just stick it in. There's very few settings really that an installer needs to go into on the sensor comfort to get a good, well-running system. I think that it's more down to a little bit of laziness or a little bit of desperation to get in and out and make some extra money on a job. That's causing it, rather than the settings being poor to start with.
We've still got lots to do. Otherwise, personally, I'd be out of a job if you said it was fantastic and we had no more to do. There's still a long way to go, and a sort of those ideas of even when it's connected, the amount of data we can see and then aggregate and look at even kind of, let's say, postcode areas and kind of really hone it down to that level of detail to say, well, your average temperature is always that. We can identify through the IP address that you're within that region. Let's set it to 5.5 and see how we get on. But I still think the capabilities of it, we're only just beginning on really this journey. I mean, optimization, everything like that, and doing it autonomously, because we don't necessarily want to kind of say to a homeowner, okay, every 6 months you've got to go through these installation settings and tweak them and kind of fine tune it. I pick up a car and it does what I need it to do. It's getting to that next step of autonomy and doing it for the customer without them noticing any sort of drop in comfort, but also no spikes in utilities bills.
Are you thinking about getting a heat pump? Then don't get caught out by a bad installation. Bodge Buster is your essential guide to asking the right questions and spotting red flags before it's too late. Written from real homeowner experience, this book gives you the knowledge to avoid costly mistakes and make informed decisions. Get Bodge Buster today in print or for Kindle, link in the description. So Sean, Ken actually mentioned the changeover months, which can be a little bit tricky because you've kind of set your weather curve on the weather compensation to work quite well. The temperature starts to kind of increase outside, the heat pump starts to cycle a little bit more frequently as you kind of get into spring and certainly into the summer and then into the autumn again. Is it something that you typically speak to your customers about to say, this is how the weather compensation works? If you do feel that the house is too warm, too cold, that the heat pump is cycling a bit too much, will you teach them how to adjust their own curve, or would you rather do that remotely?
I teach them how to do it themselves. And as I say, we've got all our customers on a group chat that either myself can answer to or one of the members of the team in the office. But I think the good thing about the Vaillant heat pumps, that's when we fit. You can set instead of being inactive pure weather compensation, which is great for the winter time, when the temperatures start getting a bit milder, we'll tell them to maybe jump it into active, and it'll use a bit of load compensation. It'll read the room. So if it is getting too hot and your desired temperature's 21 degrees or 20 degrees, but it's up at 22, the heat pump will then sense that in the room and kick it back down. So it's a bit more reactive.
So Dan, how often should homeowners be checking their curves?
A little bit different to Sean, I suppose. We don't tend to ask our customers to change the curves too much unless they're enthusiastic about learning the controls. Customers are so different. Some people don't want to touch it, and some people, as soon as you walk out the door, they're at the control, they're changing things. They're so different. If we set a curve when we commission a system, we set a reasonably safe kind of curve, within tolerance. So we'll have a design temperature, flow temperature of 40, 45, maybe 50 if it's a retro. And at the other end, it will be 35 when it's 15 outside, something like that. We then, about sort of 6 to 8 weeks after the installation's finished and we've gone away, we send one of our service guys back again just to go over the controls again, the controls that we've explained. I don't know if anybody else does this or not. But then through the year, depending on the property, again, because they're all so different, we might have to up that flow temperature a tiny bit, or we might have to change it in the shoulder months, like you've said. You get customers who are sending you data every week or every month and saying, look, this is what it's doing. Use this many units. What do you think? I guess you guys get that as well, which is really nice that people are so enthusiastic about it. But to answer your question, it depends on the customer.
To be fair to Vaillant, they are one of the better products on the market. They've got very good low modulation. Some of the units flooding the UK market, their bottom end modulation is not so good. So there's units that won't run at 25 degrees. You could put some settings in a Vaillant and then you go next door and fit a different heat pump, and those settings might not work with that individual heat pump because the algorithms, it's all built in and works differently. This is the problem with in my opinion, with weather compensation. I think as an industry, we should be going to a more room influenced based control, because then Mr. and Mrs. Miggins can just say, I want the house at 21 degrees, and the heat pump just sorts it out all by itself.
I think one of the reasons anyway, is that I do what I do is because we're up in Scotland, our outside design temperatures differ a lot from England. So In Aviemore alone, Aviemore can go down to -15. You can go up in the Highlands, you're -10. You're at the coast, and we've got a lot of old stock housing in Scotland. So we might have a nice modern house up there in the hills, or we might have an old farm cottage where they're getting a lot of influence from the wind driving through and changing the temperature, single glazed windows, but there's a lot of poorly built properties up here. I think that's why up here, from my experience, and we need to educate the customers more and see how it's doing, because it's such a difference between the winter temperature to the shoulder months to the summer up here. It changes so drastically. As we're in New South England, I think some of your outside design temperatures are above 0 degrees.
I don't know of any, but there may be.
Okay, fair enough. I just know it's not as cold down there as it is up here.
Right, so Mike, we received a question from a homeowner. It's a bit of a theoretical one, but they're asking whether a weather compensation curve would be different, maybe more aggressive or not as aggressive, whether you've got underfloor heating or radiators.
I suppose it all comes down to the system design and what target flow temperature you're designing to. We know underfloor, again, it's so open-ended. There's no blanket statement I can give for the UK housing stock. We have the most varied housing stock in Europe, but it really comes down to the importance of that system design and really understanding what flow temperatures you need from it, as well as how much work you're doing inside the property. So if you're increasing radiator sizes, it won't need to be as aggressive than if you haven't, and you have kind of smaller rads that you're trying to put more energy into the room for. So I don't think so, and every use case is kind of is different.
To echo what Mike said to a certain extent, it's the design flow temperature that's going to affect how aggressive or how high or low the curve is. Generally speaking, it is easier to get a lower curve with underfloor heating because we will often run out of wall space to get enough radiators to run, say, right the way down at 30 degrees C, but it is perfectly possible to get a 35 degrees C system running on radiators, where you would then be running pretty much the same curve as you would with underfloor heating. It is a horses for courses because it's going to depend on how well insulated the house is, which will depend how big a radiators we need to get to them lower temperatures. But ultimately, you can use the same curve for both. You could have a system that was mixed and running with one curve running right across the house. But yeah, it will vary house to house.
Are you new to heat pumps and feeding lost? Then From Zero to Heat Pump Hero helps you understand, operate, and optimize your system. No jargon, just simple practical advice from one homeowner to another. Take control of your heating and save energy. Get your copy now. Link in the description. Dan, this is a question we receive quite regularly in that we try and communicate to homeowners to always check whether their weather compensation has been enabled by their installer. So what is the best way for a homeowner, if they have had a heat pump installed, to actually verify whether that weather compensation has or hasn't been activated?
I mean, I suppose the first thing is check with the installer. Give them a call and ask them. I mean, obviously, you'll notice more obviously with radiators if the curve has been set, because your radiators will be different temperatures. Not so easy to pick up with underfloor, I suppose.
The reason I actually asked that is because when we had our heat pump installed 6 or 7 years ago now, and when I picked up the phone and I called the installer, they told me that our heat pump did not have weather compensation installed as a feature, period. Needless to say, once I got access to the back end, I did find weather compensation. It was there. They just wanted to set it as a set flow temperature because it was a lot easier for them. So, Mike, on the Vaillant units, how easy is it for homeowners to actually access that menu, or is it hidden and only made available to installers?
So we do put it through an installer level. We have the installer level codes kind of not set. So, I mean, unless the installer has set a code in there, it will always be factory set to 00. So you can access it. I would probably, refer to the operating instructions. If you've got it connected, you can kind of access various settings we've made available through the app. But ultimately, yes, it's familiarization with that control, I think, is really important for the homeowner.
Boilers and boiler systems were very forgiving. You wouldn't really pay attention to it unless it caused you a problem. Heat pumps are an investment, and part of that investment is understanding how it works, how you get through the different menu trees on the control. In my opinion, installers should be kind of almost walking customers through that, kind of through the commissioning and handover, to say, this is how it works. This is what you'll be looking at. Majority of the time, you'll only kind of want to be interacting with certain parts of it. But yes, it's understanding where they sit and kind of to avoid the journey that it sounds like you went on, having to hunt for it. It's that collaboration between installer, homeowner, and if we can help, manufacturer as well.
Customers are definitely smarter. They're more knowledgeable than they've ever been before. When an inquiry comes in to any of us, you get the feeling that they've done the research, and there's just so much knowledge out there now through all the platforms and, books that keep coming out. And everybody's becoming closer in knowledge to the experts. So when you get an inquiry for a job, it's almost like they know the answer, but they're asking you to see if you know the answer. That's fine, because if you know the answer, you know the answer. Not everybody knows all the answers, obviously. It's nice to have those conversations with customers that know what they want and know what they want to achieve from a system, because that's one of the first questions with a new customer is what do you want from this system? How warm do you want your house to be? How much water do you need? All these questions start to piece together the design, don't they? With those initial questions.
I'd have to agree with that as well. Have conversations with your customer. I mean, looking at Sean, where he is in Scotland, his client base is going to be, and their weather conditions and their ambient conditions going to be so much different. If he came down to the south, he wouldn't be putting his same weather curve settings in the south of England. Even just wind chill on a property can have a very significant difference on how that property reacts. Some products will have like a very easy offset adjustment for the end user, and to just shift the curve a little bit up and down to give them some a bit of trimming control. Some you have to, as you say, enter into an installer settings to change some parameters. There's just so much variety of controllers out there. It is horses for courses, I suppose. If I was installing again, and how I used to work, I would try not judge the client, but get a feel for how maybe technical they are, how technical they want to be. And maybe I would go down a certain product because that's an easier product to operate.
Sean, we're beginning to see a lot more products like Homely, Havenwise, and Idea hitting the market. How much do those kind of third-party additions to a system actually impact that weather compensation? Do they override settings? Do they enhance them? Do they add any value from that kind of running cost perspective from what we've been speaking about today?
I say certainly some of the systems enhance it. I've not used any of them myself personally. I've seen the Homely one, the recent updates. It will adjust the temperature in the house depending on what's happening outside, along with the heat curve. I was reading that the other day. I just stick to the manufacturer's controls. I've not veered in that area with the external stuff.
So is there value to these kind of things, Liam? Is it worth investing, in the extra bits and pieces, or should just a well set up weather compensation curve work perfectly?
My experience with them has not been great. On all but one of our systems, it's been manufacturer's controls only. There was one installation we had where a rather well-known person in our industry did a podcast and said how good one of these third-party controls was. I had a customer ring me up and say, that Vaillant we've ordered, can we change it to a Samsung and put that control on? So we did. And then 3 weeks after the install, he sent me a text message saying, I've removed it. It was doing my head in. I'm just on the Samsung controls now. In fact, Ken helped me set that one up as well, that job. That was my very first Samsung. I like using the manufacturer's controls. I do think, like Ken said earlier, some of the lower cost units in the market at the minute may not be performing that well on the manufacturer's controls because of the limited functionality on them. Generally, manufacturer's controls should be all you're considering, really.
Where do you sit on it, Dan?
Well, same as Liam for the most part. We'd always try and stick to the manufacturer's controls. However, we have fitted some Samsungs and some sort of media variants where those stats are just the controls as operated as a stat. They're just basically on-off stats, I think, aren't they? They're a bit more basic, the controls. So quite recently, I think we fitted 4 or 5 optimizers, and the jury's out really. But there was one guy in particular. We fitted I think it was the first Gen 7 Samsung that we fitted, I sort of convinced him to use the Samsung controller, but he didn't like the fact that he was a really techie guy. And he didn't like the fact that I think there was a 2-degree hysteresis on the stat, and he didn't like the fact that it was over and undershooting by 2 degrees. He wanted it bang on 21 degrees all the time. And I said that, and I told him lots of times, I said, that's not the best way to run your heat pump. You need that bit of give either way to sort of soften the blow a little bit, really. And this went on for quite a while. We went to a third-party stat just to give him a bit more control, because he was getting quite frustrated with the fact that he couldn't really do anything with the Samsung controller. I didn't agree with him, but that's fair enough, we'll do that. And then he came back a few months later and said, oh no, I'm still not happy with that. So we have swapped to an optimizer now, and I haven't heard anything since, and I believe he's doing okay with it. My experience isn't a bad one, but I haven't looked at the data as such yet, so I'm sort of joys out, really.
How about you, Ken?
Well, at the moment, Havenwise is my favourite at this place in time. I've trialled them on an old Samsung, strangely enough, and I found it worked very well. It completely takes over the system, so the controller actually becomes redundant, and it will be looking at the outside temperature, whether there's any influence in the weather, looking at the internet data that's coming through, and it kept my house at sort of 20, 21 degrees very accurately. It had a preheat function, so if you have a time of use tariff, it can preheat a little bit on your house when it's cheap, so you take a little bit of a hit of efficiency, but the rates are cheap, and so you can do a lot of preloading and then really back off when the rates change to a higher rate, and then again come back into play throughout the day when the house finally cools down or needs topping up. To me, if that sort of control was built in every heat pump controller, then we wouldn't necessarily be having these sort of conversations. It'd be much easier for the end user. And that's what I'm trying to advocate and trying to push as much as I possibly can.
Mike, Ken touched on time of use tariffs. How easy is it to program a Vaillant controller to try and avail of those different time of use tariffs? If you do want to crank up the heat pump at, let's say, midnight till 5 a.m., is it quite easy to do?
Being a German manufacturer, there's certain German legislations which means they have to provide smart grid ready contacts, which is a benefit to us. We don't have such mandates at this moment in time. So there is ESCO connections on there for energy services. What we've seen more interest in is how Havenwise look at things, which is no cost for extra equipment, but API driven. So using the data by fitting one of our gateways, you can then control, and we're in conversation with numerous different sort of utilities to enable that API driven flexibility, really.
Obviously, OVO Energy, they do like a 15 pence flat rate for your heat pump 24/7, but we do a lot of solar battery storage customers, so they're on variable tariffs. So say, for instance, we've got customers on Octopus Go, we'll have the hot water running at night time, say 12 till 2, and then we'll have some a well-insulated property, they might have a setback temperature. So say the house is at 20, setback's at 18. So say 9, 10 o'clock at night, we'll set it so the setback comes on, so the heat pump's then cooling down. And then round about 3 or 4, depending how much heat is needed put into that property, that's when we'll then put the main temperature back up, and that's during the cheap tariff at 8 pence. So at 4 and 5 in the morning, to get that extra power for the heat pump to heat the house back up, it's only cost you, say, 8 or 16 pence. And then at 5:30 in the morning, you go back into the 27, 28 pence, whatever tariff it is you're on.
Mike, we touched on load compensation earlier. So I think the biggest drawback in terms of if you want to position your controller for that house in order to pretty much drive the load for that particular whole property, and it's in a really, really awkward position, are there wireless units that you can actually utilize instead of hard wiring them?
Yeah, so we offer both wired and wireless for the ease of sighting use case, really, giving the consumer choice as to where they want to place it. sensible placement is always kind of a benefit. Don't stick it somewhere where it's going to be impacted by solar gain and everything like that, or in locations where you've got more people, or if it's going to affect the controller, it's going to affect the data that is putting into the system, which might have a knock-on effect. So wired or wireless, because we don't want to have to reroute wires or put an additional load on the installers if they need to put in additional equipment, really.
What's the one tip that you would give to any homeowner that's actually watching this episode to make the most use out of their heat pump using weather compensation?
The one tip is to start low and go upwards. If you start with a low temperature and you find it's not quite right, bump it up a little bit. So bump the curve up, or the room temperature on the front end, where effectively we're doing the same kind of thing, until you find your comfortable temperature. You will likely settle on a lower temperature that you're comfortable at, and therefore a more efficient temperature than if you whacked it really high and then started coming down until you got uncomfortable. So a little bit of discomfort goes a long way.
If you've got any questions about heat pumps, then you need to join the Renewable Heating Hub forums. You can connect with other homeowners, share experiences, and get advice on heat pumps and renewables. Sign up today and be a part of the conversation. Link in the description. So that brings us to the end of another packed episode of Homeowners Q&A. I hope that this discussion has helped demystify how weather and load compensation can dramatically affect your heat pump's performance, comfort levels, and running costs. A big thank you to Mike, Sean, Liam, Ken, and Dan for sharing their expertise, and of course a special thank you to Vaillant for sponsoring this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a comment, and check out our back catalogue for more expert discussions on renewable heating. Until next time, stay warm, stay green, stay tuned. Goodbye.
Yeah, there's things without getting Mars's 4,000 subscribers to all sign NDAs.
Hello? Oh dear. Your audio's gone all crinkly and a bit weird.
Sounds like Johnny Five, the robot.
Technology, who'd work with it?
Yeah.
I tell you. Hello, we can hear you good.
Wonderful. I've got no headphones now, but it seems to be working. So
Editing, right? You'll just all of a sudden lose your AirPods halfway through. I know I don't look it, but more time I've spent working in this heating industry than I haven't. So it's about...
Oh dear.
doesn't want to reveal his age.
Finishing statement. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Oh yeah, it's frozen. Didn't realise.
Well, we've got a kilt walk tomorrow. Clydebank to Loch Lomond.
Nice.
Wow.
Happy days.
Great. It'll be fine.
Yeah.